Hello, and welcome to Train Signal. I'm Don Jones, and this is the Creating and Using Views lesson in the Database Administration Fundamentals course. In this lesson, we'll be talking about SQL Server views, including the purpose of views, how to create a view in the graphical user interface, how to create a view by using the data definition language, and a brief comparison of using views versus using tables. I'm sure you know the old saying, if it looks like a duck and acts like a duck, it's probably a duck. But in SQL Server, if it looks like a table and acts like a table, but it isn't actually a table, then it is probably a view. A view is a kind of virtual table. It simply provides another way of looking at the data that's already in an existing table or even multiple tables. So a view doesn't contain any data. The data in your database always lives in tables. A view is just a different way of presenting that data. A view can combine columns from two or more tables. It can contain just a subset of columns from one or more tables. It can even just contain a subset of the rows within one or more tables. A view can even add columns, calculating their values based on the underlying data that's in those tables, and so on. They have a lot of flexibility. It's like a pair of rose-colored glasses that you can use to look at the data in your tables. Here's an example. At the bottom of the screen, I have two tables. The one on top appears to contain information about customer orders, including their shipping method, the order ID, and the order date. The table on the bottom appears to include information about the customers themselves. Now let's say I have some users within my organization who need to kind of look at a combination of this data. They need to see shipping methods and order IDs and order dates, but they also need to see customer names and the city and state that things were shipped to. Perhaps they're going to do some analysis on how long shipments take to get to different states and cities. To protect my customers' privacy, though, I really don't want these folks looking at my customers' phone numbers or their street addresses. So I don't want to just let them access these tables directly. Instead, I create a view. Now, this view includes all of the columns from my order information table, but it only includes a few of the columns from my customer information table. So it gives my analysis user exactly what they need. They get order dates, shipping methods, order IDs, customer names, customer cities, customer states, but they don't get the phone or the address information. So this view is still drawing the data from the underlying tables. It's just combining it and presenting it in a different way. So why use views? Well, sometimes they're more convenient. If you have a really complicated database structure and you need to be able to combine several different tables together, rather than having to write that query every single time, it's easier just to build it as a view. So in the future, instead of having to write a long and complicated query to combine data from many different places, you just look at the view and it does it for you. Views can also present a security layer, as in the example I just gave you, where you want to be able to expose certain information to a particular user or application, but you don't want them to be able to see all of the data from the underlying tables. Views can also be simpler to use. Because they can contain things like calculated columns and all that, you can really create a very simplified view of your underlying data for various applications. Views also have a significant performance benefit. You see, when you execute a query, SQL Server has to think pretty hard about how it wants to actually run the query, how it wants to go pull all the data together. When you create a view, SQL Server is able to save that plan, and so when you execute the view in the future, it does so a little bit more quickly than if you were just executing an ad hoc query. SQL Server Management Studio provides a convenient way to create and manage views, and as you do it, it displays the underlying data definition language that it's running to implement your view's instructions. Let's hop over to SQL Server Management Studio and take a look at how to create a view in the GUI. SQL Server Management Studio makes it pretty easy to create new views. I don't want to mess up my sample database, so I'll do all of this in my test database. I don't have any views to start with other than those system views, so I can right-click View, create a new view, and it's going to start by asking me what data sources I want for this. I can include tables, other views, some functions that produce data, synonyms. Let's just keep this simple. We'll start with a single table called people. So I'll add my people table. If I added multiple tables, each of them would show up in its own little box. And if they were related to one another, this would actually draw lines between them to show me the relationships. So this is pretty simple to use. I can say, give me the ID and the name. And it's actually building right here the SQL statement necessary to create this view. And if I want to test it, I want to get a quick preview of what my view would look like, I can hit the Execute SQL button, and it'll pull it up. Now, my table has no data in it, which is why my preview has no data in it, but this is showing me that it's giving me the ID and the name column. Yeah. Take it back, I'm not real crazy about that. The ID is not going to be meaningful to anyone, so let's use name and address, and let's call it people name and people address. Run this again, and it has changed my output columns in my view to say people name and people address. Let's put the name in order too. Let's sort that in ascending order. Now it automatically updates my select statement. So it now includes the order by. And because in order to use an order by within a view, you have to specify the top predicate, it says select the top 100%. Now that's not limiting. 100% is still all of the rows. So it's just kind of one of the rules that SQL has about how these things get used together. But ultimately, let's test it. And it still works. You can actually edit this SQL statement directly. I'm not crazy about people name. Let's change it to person name and person address. And when I hit tab to get out of there, it updates this automatically. Oops, don't know why I added that. Let's get rid of that. It updates this, keeps this the same. When I run my query, I get the updated column name. So this is really a cool way to work with these. When you're finished, if you like what you see, just hit save. You can save it as person view or people view or whatever you like. So we'll leave this in there going forward, but this is kind of a great way to sort of drag and drop your way to a view. It lets you play with it and see what the actual data is going to look like at the end. Quickly undo it so you don't have a lot of trial and error when you actually start working with the things, let's say as part of a client application. Of course, you can also create views by using DDL, the data definition language, and that provides a more automatable way of creating views. This is also preferred by those that have more experience, since they can often accomplish the same task a bit more quickly than they could in the GUI. With that in mind, let's go back to SQL Server Management Studio and see how to create a view by using DDL. Creating a new view in DDL is pretty straightforward. Click the New Query button, type your DDL query, hit Execute, and you're done. Of course, if you're not really comfortable using DDL or writing DDL, there's a shortcut too. Right-click an existing object, script it as a create statement to a new query editor window. And really the heart of this is right here, this create view statement. So just to kind of draw your attention to that, I'm going to delete all this other stuff that got put in here. We'll change this to create a new view called People View 2. And you'll notice this is selecting the top 100%, so all rows, including name as person name, address as person address, from the people table, ordering it by person name. Here we go, execute. And we'll have to refresh our little object explorer over here to see that the new people view too. So creating a view from DDL is pretty straightforward. And the neat thing is you can pile a bunch of these things together and just separate them with a go. For example, we'll copy this to the clipboard. And I can paste in a bunch of different views save this as a single batch file, and then when I ran it, it would automatically create all of those for me. Of course, I probably wouldn't want to create 7 things with the same name. That would be error messages, but you get the idea. The real advantage of DDL is that it gives you this ability to automate several things happening in a sequence rather than having to go through the GUI and poke all the buttons individually. It could just be a little bit more time consuming. Both views and tables are utilized or queried in almost exactly the same way. Views can have some restrictions on making changes to the data depending on exactly how the view itself was created. We're not going to cover those differences in detail, but you should consult SQL Server's documentation for specifics on when a view's functionality might be a little bit restricted. Let's go over to SQL Server Management Studio and take a look at querying information from views and comparing that to how we'd query information from tables. Views are a lot more fun to play with when there's some data in the underlying tables. So we'll get away from our test database and go up to AdventureWorks because that's got a lot of data in it. Let's go ahead and create a new query. And let's take a look at a table as well as some views that are in here. So starting with the views, let's see, we've got a few here. Let's select everything from human resources let's see, vEmployee. And you can see in this little menu that there's a slightly different icon for a view, which is what I'm focused on right now, and for a table, which are the ones at the top of this list. So let's just hit Tab to accept that and execute it. All right, this has pulled a lot of information together. Now, let's do select all from human resources employee, which is a table. There's a neat trick. You can highlight this, right-click it, and just execute that. Okay, so this is pretty good information. Gosh, it doesn't look like selecting information from a table is all that different from selecting information from a view. It appears to use the exact same syntax. I get the results formatted in a similar way. This is really the point of a view. It is a virtual table. It looks like a table, it feels like a table, it smells like a table, but it's not a table. So this is one of the reasons that Microsoft really likes using these. It's why database developers and folks like using these, because you can use them to do some work for you, but in the end, it's just like using a real table. We could change this data, do all sorts of manipulation, sort the results, filter the results, do anything we want to do. It's really just like a table. In this lesson, we talked about what views are for, and I showed you how to create a view in the GUI and by using DDL. We also looked at how to utilize views and compared them to querying information from tables.